Mental illness, a sad thing. We have a lot of sympathy for those who suffer from mental illness, sympathy for them, sympathy for their families. But when the illness takes a body count, it's the innocent victims we have the most amount of sympathy for. Case in point, cop killer Kachkar, Richard Kachkar. January 12, 2011, he runs barefoot from a homeless shelter in Toronto and steals an idling snowplow parked in front of a Tim's, leaving a dead cop, Sergeant Ryan Russell, and Russell's grieving family in his wake. Kachkar has been declared NCR, not criminally responsible, sent to a mental facility instead of jail. Here's what the widow had to say about all of this earlier in the spring.
He was serving and protecting all of us, and he was killed in the line of duty. Nothing changes that. He was killed by this man, and nothing changes that fact.
A lot is said about closure during times like these. Are you going to be able to find any closure with him being found not criminally responsible?
Absolutely not. There is zero closure. In a verdict of not criminally responsible, my family, most likely myself, will have to fight this for the rest of my life. And this will be on a yearly basis. So there is no such thing as closure. There is no such thing as telling my son that, you know, your dad died, but the man who did this will never hurt you. And my son is very concerned about that. And now I have to tell him, you know, I got to keep fighting for you, Nolan, and I'm going to keep fighting for your daddy.
Now the Ontario Review Board, which oversees mentally ill offenders, ruled earlier this week that Kachkar will be held in a medium security centre in Whitby, just outside Toronto. The board even ruling that he should be eligible for escorted visits to the town. For much more, we turn to crime specialist Ross McLean. Ross, I was talking to one of the reporters, Michelle Mandel, Toronto Sun, who covered every inch of that trial and every inch of the story. And I asked her, Michelle, what's the probability, what's the level of probability that Kachkar is a completely free man within 5 years? She said, extremely high. Your take?
I believe Michelle has it right. And, you know, Michelle is one of those people, Charles, who she covers the court cases like nobody else. She covers them and she brings the human story and the human tragedies to the readers for the Sun News. I believe, yeah, there is a great chance that he will be free in less than 5 years or so. And what you see with the widow as she spoke there, Charles, is most people are very offended by the process of how this goes on as well, too. We don't find out about this process until instances like this, where you've got a high-profile victim that gets to speak about the process and how bad it is. The process needs to be changed, and we need to look at how we deal with the mentally ill before they commit homicides and after they commit homicides.
What is wrong with the idea? I mean, I'm not bothered by the idea that he's in a mental facility instead of a traditional jail. I mean, nobody's bothered by that. But what is wrong with the idea that if you're declared not criminally responsible, you're guilty, but you're insane or not, you know, not criminally responsible? What is the problem with making sure that you do the same amount of time in that mental hospital, that mental facility, that you would do in jail if you weren't NCR?
Well, this is where there becomes a bit more of a disconnect. I mean, as you say, in this case, it's difficult because you do have mental illness, so he wasn't criminally responsible at the time. But does there need to be time spent that's punitive in a sense anyways? I think there needs to be some sort of behavior modification, because sometimes the issues with the mentally ill, Charles, is they'll be on medications, then they'll stop taking them, then they'll go out and they'll be dangerous again. When they take their medications, they're not dangerous. But here's one other key distinction I want to make. I've looked into some of these cases with the mentally ill. And the medications they're on, Charles, aren't medications in many times that make them better, that help them get in balance. Many times what they're actually on is what's called a chemical restraint. They are basically drugged up so much that they can't get motivated to do anything. So when they decide not to take their drugs, they're essentially taking off their restraints. And I would argue if someone needs to be chemically restrained, they probably also need to be physically restrained.
Let me move on to something completely different. Irvington, Alabama, we covered the story earlier this week in which a shopkeeper chases down someone who had robbed his store, and he uses a gun, and he shoots the individual, and is congratulated by police and other authorities in Irvington, Alabama. What if that had happened in Toronto?
In Toronto, he'd be up on charges for murder. I got almost no doubt about that. We've got a real disconnect here, Charles, between how our laws are implemented and how they're passed. I mean, our laws, the laws have always been your home is your castle in Canadian law. The use of force laws, I think it's very important that all of your viewers know this. The same use of force laws that police use to apply force is the exact same section of the criminal code that applies to citizens. Yet you'll see that it's handled entirely different when a police officer uses what could be deemed excessive force and what a homeowner does. It's implemented differently because you have municipal police forces deciding how they're going to interpret that law.
All right, in this case, the thief wasn't killed, but you talk about murder, so you'd say he'd be up on attempted murder charges because he shot him.
Oh, for certain. We have a case now just north of Toronto where a homeowner in an upper middle class home, he's a contractor, so he has a garage that's no doubt full of tools and things like that. The middle of the night, 4:30 in the morning, Charles, he hears something going on outside, looks out, and he sees 3 people breaking into his garage. He goes out there with his brother, who happens to live with him, I believe. They go out there and go to grab these guys. They get in a fight and a tussle. 2 of them end up running off. They grab the one, they arrest him, they use force on him. The police came, and they charge, both homeowners are now charged with assault bodily harm. And we're not getting any of the details on it. I mean, God forbid you should go and defend your home using the same section for use of force that the police use. When the police use it, they don't get charged for it. When a citizen does, there seems to be a different measuring stick. And it's actually, to me, Charles, it's opposite. The police should be more accountable for the use of force because they're trained in how to do it and they've got the tools. The citizen at home, when they come out at 3 in the morning, they don't know what they're facing. They're trying to protect themselves.
Right. It just seems to me that we're constantly being told by the system that they pass new regs and new laws, and people now have a greater license to use force, but of course, not a gun, and in this case, not even their hands. So I don't know what constitutes force anymore. But let me move on to something completely different again. And this time it's an upper middle-aged guy. We're told he's retired. We're told he's a Canadian. We're told he's in Cambodia under arrest because he was having sex with a 14-year-old. He's a sex tourist. Wife is completely surprised. Says, yeah, she knows he's been to Cambodia lots and Thailand and Laos and whatever. He loves to travel to those places, but has no idea that this is the kind of thing that he may be doing. Should this country have any responsibilities here? Should we prosecute this individual if he gets a very, very light sentence in Cambodia for being a sex tourist?
Oh, we need to address our laws in this, Charles. You know, the Canadian flag has stood for a long time. The character of this country has stood since the birth of this country for meaning something and a set of values. You know, when you travel with the Canadian flag, it used to mean a whole lot more maybe 15 years ago than it does now, but it stood for something and people knew. When you travel to another country, you're traveling and you're being accepted on the strength of that passport, which is based on the strength of the Canadian character and how we hold our people accountable for doing things. So, the question we need to clarify is when you're using that passport to travel to another country to go commit criminal acts, you're doing it essentially holding up your Canadian passport under the flag. We need to determine how much we want to hold people responsible or how they should be held responsible for when they break what are really Canadian values and laws. It's a discussion that we need to have because travel's never been cheaper and countries are making money off of this sex tourism.
There are thousands of these guys, Ross, as you know well, and as most people who are informed know, this isn't a one-off. It's just very, very unusual that someone gets caught. Ross, thank you very much for these visits on Thursdays. Appreciate it very much.
Thanks, Charles.